Hi folks. All right, so this is the first video for chapter 11, which begins on page 171 in your textbook. I also just want to highlight, I'll zoom in here, your homework, and I'll come back to this, but it's going to be workbook page 87 to 88. It's really just page 88. 87 just has some, like an example, but 11.1a, 1 and 2. And it's going to be writing baselines, which you'll understand more of what they're asking for after we finish this video. So chapter 11, you can read page 171, which gives a good introduction and overview, but it is about counterpoint, two-part counterpoint. So the relationship between a bass line and then a soprano line is what we're talking about. And there's going to be a lot of principles in this that are going to sound very familiar because we've discussed them throughout the last chapters multiple times. It's just, again, one more step of putting all of the principles together. So what we're going to do is walk through the first part up until self-test 1 and using the examples they gave us. And then I'm going to walk through self-test 1, the example using the principles. So there are 4 steps in this process of composing an unembellished bass line. So the first thing we're going to just talk about is what this bass line is. There's only going to be one note for every chord, unlike some of our other writing that we've done where we've had moving parts above the bass line. Right now we're just going to have the bass line is the one note for every chord. Okay, so it'll be 4 to 6 measure phrases. We're going to move in half notes right now. I want to point this out. The line can begin on either beat 1 or 3. So in the example, we're starting here on beat 1, but you can have an example, and actually your book has this, your workbook has this, where they say start on beat 3. So you would be basically starting with a half note and then a bar line, half note, half note, half note, half note, however long, and then ending on a half note. Because remember, if we start with a half note, we're borrowing the 2 beats from this last measure. So that might be what yours looks like. If you start on beat 1, like it does in this example, you're going to have a whole note here at the end. If you start on beat 3, like your workbook wants you to do, you're going to have a half note here at the end. Right? That's what harmonic rhythm is discussing. Okay, the key, we're going to keep it in major or minor, and we're going to begin and end on tonic or dominant harmonies. If you're going to start, if it's starting with a dominant harmony, so you're starting on a 5, it's going to be an upbeat, as in it's going to be this example right here, where you're not starting on beat 1, but you're starting on beat 3. Okay, but they're going to give us our chord progression right now. So step 1, here we are. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take the bass line that they give us, the chords that they give us. Let me just erase, oh boy, undo that. We're going to erase this for now, okay? So the first thing we're going to do is notate the bass line in root position. So they've given us G minor and the chords all the way across here. Okay? So what the author has done is they've gone ahead and written in those notes. Now, it's important to note here this range. Stay within approximately the E2 to C4 and don't use huge leaps. So what they're saying is you don't want to do this. Like if it's G and you're starting on 1, you don't want to start on G up here, as your first note, and then jump way down here and then go, okay, I'm going to go back up to 1 way up here. So think about those principles of staying in a good range and good movement, even though it's bass line. Yes, basses can jump around, but just think about good part writing principles. Okay, so that's step 1. The bass line in root position. Step 2 is determining which chords have to remain in root position. Okay, so there are certain ones that should stay in root position. The first and the last chords, the 5 in a 5-1 cadence, and if the cadence is the last 2 chords of the phrase, the 5 and the 1 should be in root position in this case. So in a way, we're creating well, we could say we're going to create a PAC, but we don't have a melody line right here. But we're setting us up for that because we have a 5-1 in root position. And then if we have a 5-6 progression, we want to have those both in root position as well. In our example here, they've circled the ones that are staying in root position. So these 3 notes, we're going to keep them where they are. Okay. Step 3 is determining the chords that must be used in first inversion. If you remember back to us writing our, like when we were doing root position part writing, I said don't use any diminished chords. We don't want to use diminished chords because we don't use those in root position. So here is that in a different way here. We do want to put them in first inversion. So any diminished triads that we have, this would include diminished 2 in a minor key or diminished 7 in major and minor. We're going to change those to first inversion. So what they've done here, this used to be an F, but they moved it to an A to put it in first inversion. And then over here, this 2, okay, that used to be an A, but they moved it to first inversion. So that's what they mean by diminished triads. The other thing we want to note is that if we have a 5-1 progression in an internal progression, so remember how we talked about using first inversion chords is to offset the weight of the 5-1. So if we had, in this case we don't have it, but if let's say we had, if this was a 1 and this was a 5, that wouldn't really fit. But we would want to take one of these and make it a 6 chord. Not both of them, but one of them. And the way we would determine that is what would work best with our bass line. So on to step 4, and this is where we're going to improve the bass contour. Again, we've talked about a lot of these principles just applying to the melody. Now we're talking them in relationship to the bass line, and then we'll talk about how the melody and the bass line work together. So in this case, the first thing they point out is that if you have repeated bass notes, it's a good idea to avoid repeating a bass note across a bar line because it can confuse the harmonic rhythm. So if we zoom back out here for just a second, let me go over here. You'll notice over here we had 2 C's. Woo, didn't want to do that. 2 C's here that were repeated, but there's a bar line in there. So instead, what we've done, or what they've done here in this example, is they've taken that 4 chord, and instead of it being in root position, they've put it into first inversion as a 4-6 right here. Okay. Then the next step is the focal point, just like with melody. It's also best if the bass line contains a single focal point, either highest or lowest point of the bass line. So that's a little different from our melody. So in example 11-4, what we have up here, this E that we just put there is our highest point, and that provides our focal point. And it's important to note that because if you look at a lowest point, we actually have 3 Gs. So that's not a low focal point, and we're going to actually change that in just a second. Okay, step 3, convert any large leaps. First inversions are often used to convert large leaps into smaller leaps. So the 6th, the 6th between this G, I'm going to use a different color here. So this G to this E, that's a pretty big leap. So we're going to change this 1 and make it a 1-6. You can see that they do this down here. And by doing that, now we've taken that leap, and instead of a 6th, it's now a 4th. We've also improved the contour of this bass line by making it stepwise here. Next, tonal variety. By inverting that 1 chord, it also helps the bass line, like I just said, with having some more contour, but it also takes one of those G's that we had up here. So we had 3 G's. Now we've taken 1 of them away, leaving 2, the first and the last, which is much better. So now we have a nice contour. We have a low point, a high point, and then to a low point. We want to have tonal variety. That's preferred over tonal redundancy, having one single note that's used more repeatedly. Number 5, change of direction. If a large leap occurs in the line, you want to change the direction of the line after the leap and if possible before the leap as well. We don't have that in this example, but we might in some others. Same thing that we've talked about with melodies. So just want to approach a leap, something that is more than a fourth really, in the opposite direction and leave it in the opposite direction. Dissonant intervals. Avoid the use of augmented intervals, sevenths, and any interval larger than an octave. Now we can use some diminished intervals, a diminished fourth and a diminished fifth. They're illustrated here. It's usually using it before a leap or in, like, you notice the direction here. So we go down and then up and down. But again, you want to probably avoid those dissonant intervals as much as possible, but you can use a diminished fourth or a diminished fifth. Two more points here. So melodic minor, I mentioned this earlier. If you're in a minor key, always remember to use melodic minor. So as you note here, in a melodic minor, the sixth and the seventh are raised going up, but then they're lowered going back down. This may change the quality of the triad. So you may want to, you have to look back and say, oh wait, am I actually representing the appropriate chord there? In this example, the progression 4, 5, 1, if you invert the first two chords, you should change the 4, 6. So this is the 4, 5, 1. The 4, 6 is now going to be major to avoid an augmented second in the bass. Okay, but that's also goes directly with melodic minor, where you're raising those two. Likewise, here at the end, the progression 1, 5, 4, 5, 1, 5, 4, 5 there. If you invert the two middle chords, you should change this 5, 6 here to a minor 5. Usually we have a major 5 when we're in a minor key, but in this case we're lowering that seventh, and so therefore that becomes minor again. Let me just play example 11-7 so you can hear how this sounds. We're in the key of A minor. Okay. And then our last thing is 6/4 chords. You may have noted that we haven't used any 6/4 chords. And for right now, I want you to avoid using them. There may be a time to use them. For right now, don't use them. So we're only talking about root position and first inversion chords. So now that we've walked through the 4 steps, we're going to zoom in here. This is the self-test from page, 1 second, let me look it up. This is from page 175. Again, in the self-test, they walk you through examples, and then number 1 is at the bottom. So I'm going to walk through number 1 here using the principles that we just discussed. So our first step is to write in our root position bass line, given the chords that they've given us. So my first step is actually going to first be to draw out my chart. I went ahead and drew the whole chart. In reality, you probably could just draw that line out to start with, because that's the only information you need for this first step. So we're going to start with our 1, which is an F, and then our 7, E, 1, F, 6, D, 5, C, 1, F, 2, G, 5, C, and 1, F. Now note, because we started on a half note on beat 1, this last note is going to be a whole note. That's not a great F. Let me rewrite that one. Ah, not much better, but that's okay. So that's our first step. We drew it in root position. Now our second step is to note the ones that need to stay in root position. So the ones that need to stay are our first and last chords, and our 5 going into our 5, 1. So I think, let's zoom back up here to our step 2, first and last chords, 5 and a 5, 1 cadence. Yes, so those are the ones that need to stay in root position. Our third step here, determining the chords that need to be in first inversion. So our diminished triads, and then if we have a 5, 1 in the middle of our phrase, which in this case we do. So first we're going to take our diminished triad and we're going to make that a 5 or a 7 diminished 6. So I'm going to actually erase this E and we're going to change that to a G. I don't have any other diminished chords, so that's all I need to do there. But then I also want to check here, and I need to either change this one or that one to be a 6 chord. So I think what I'm going to do is change my 5 to be a 5, 6, because that's going to give me a better bass line moving up here. Okay, so now I have stepwise motion D, D, E, F, G moving up there. Okay. Now step 4 is our most involved step. So I'm going to actually move my example here. I'm going to move it over to this side so that we can look through our steps of, or all of the parts of step 4 while we're looking at this. And it's going to get a little tricky to try to see all of it. But so first thing we want to do is avoid repeated notes. If I look at our example here, we don't have any repeated notes, especially across the bar line, but we don't have any at all. So we're done with that. Focal point. Now, in this case, let me play it. This is what it sounds like. So we could say that we have a low focal point. We don't have a high focal point because we repeat that G here and here. But we could say that we have a low focal point right here. So let's just leave that for now, and we'll see if we're going to vary anything else with that. So the next part then is converting any large leaps. The only large leap we have is right here, this G to C. But I think we're going to leave that there because we don't want to change. The only thing we could do is if we would change this 2 to a 2, 6, we'd put a B, so we'd go there. Let's see what that sounds like. No. I'm gonna leave it because I do like, I'm gonna go back here, I'm gonna take this out because I like this motion right here that we have moving up, that motion. So we'll leave that for now. Tonal variety. So we do have, let's see, let me count up our Fs. 1, 2, 3, 4 Fs. That's quite a few of those. So let's see what we could do to break up that variety so we can have some more variety instead of redundancy. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is change this one, the first one right here, to a 1, 6. Get my eraser out. So let's move that to an A, which could feel like we have a little bit of a repeat of what's happening later in the piece. Let me zoom in here a little bit. Okay, if we change that to a 1, 6. And I think I'm going to take this 6 and I move it up the octave. And now what's happening is I am going to have a higher focal point. Okay. So now I have, ooh. Now let me think about what's my, I have to think through my 7th scale degree, although we're not in minor, so that doesn't matter. But this doesn't work. So what if I had said this, I was going to change to a 5, 6, but I think I'm changing my mind. And I'm going to change this back to a 5, which would be a C. And I'm going to put it up here. Okay, I'm going to take this out. But then I have to do a 5/6 somewhere. So I'm going to change this F to a 1/6, which would be an A. So I need to make sure I put a 6 next to that. So I've changed that to a 1/6. So now the ending is just not working very well because we've now shifted and we're going up, and that's a huge jump down. So let me take this out for now. I know my 5/1, whoops. I'm gonna go back to putting my 1 in there. That needs to be there. But now that I don't know, I want my 5 way down. So I'm gonna put my C up here for my 5/1. So now it's just my 2. My 2 is a G. I could do a G here. So that would sound like this. But what if I do a 2/6? That is so much smoother. So I'm going to take that 2 and I'm going to make this a 2/6. And I just realized this is supposed to be a whole note because it's the end. So now my bass line sounds like this. And I think that works really well. That's a good bass line. So let's talk through the steps. First thing we did is we kept the notes that needed to be in root position. So those are the only ones that had to be, the ones that are circled in yellow. Then the second step, we moved the notes that needed to be in first inversion to first inversion. That was one. Now, here was our other spot. Originally, I made this a 5/6, but then I changed my mind and I decided to make that a 1/6. Remember, either of those two chords, this one or this one, has to be a 6 chord, but it's up to you which one. You just can't do both, okay? So then that was step 1 and step 2. Then we did step 3. Woo, sorry, I zoomed way out here. I'm sorry, that was step 3, first inversion. Then step 4 has all of those steps, and this is where we have more license for creativity. So in that case, I decided to make this a 6 chord. I decided to move my 6 that was down and move it up the octave. And then I switched these around and made this a 6 chord as well. And that's what gave us this line. So now I have an upper focal point, and but I have a very clear beginning and ending on the tonic. I hope that helps you to see. There's another self-test on page, let's see, I think it's 183. That you can do, and you can look at that in the book and try that out, and then look in the back of the book and see if your answer matches up. By the way, there are a lot of varieties. You don't have to do it the way that the book says, as long as you're following all the principles. And then flipping back, your homework is to do this 2 times. A1 and 2, this is on page 88. Both of those, one's major and one's minor. So you're going to write in your bass line and then do whatever you need to. I would recommend doing this maybe on a separate piece of paper rather than doing it in your workbook, because you're probably going to have to erase quite a bit. So if you have some staff paper, this might be a good time to use it. I hope that helps you and that you understand. If you have any questions, you can let me know. And sorry for my voice, but look for part 2 to be coming out either later today or tomorrow morning. Thanks.